For over a century, a single mystery surrounding Adolf Hitler appeared to be permanently unsolvable. It wasn't a question of his actions or his motivations, but rather the enigma of his own bloodline. His father was born out of wedlock, and his grandfather's identity was scrubbed from history. Ironically, the tyrant who forged an empire on the myth of racial perfection likely couldn't have passed his own genetic test. In 2010, a DNA analysis of his surviving kin sparked global shockwaves with a result so paradoxical it defied belief. Then in 2025, a breakthrough involving bloodstains from the very sofa where he committed suicide provided an answer that caught the world off guard. But the truth wasn't found in the sensational headlines. It was far more unsettling. To truly grasp what that genetic code revealed, we have to travel back to a remote Austrian village in 1836. A working-class woman named Maria Schicklgruber, unmarried and struggling, found herself pregnant. In June 1837, she gave birth to a son, Alois, with the father's name left chillingly blank on the baptismal papers. 5 years later, Maria wed Johann Georg Hitler, a wandering miller who drifted from one town to the next, becoming Alois's legal stepfather. However, when Maria passed away in 1847, it wasn't Johann Georg who raised the boy. Instead, the responsibility fell to his younger brother, Johann Nepomuk Hitler, a prosperous farmer in the village of Spittel. Nepomuk cared for Alois throughout his youth and eventually left him a significant fortune. But nearly 30 years after Maria was buried, Nepomuk orchestrated a strange legal maneuver. He gathered witnesses before a notary to swear that his long-dead brother, Johann Georg, had always claimed Alois as his own. The local priest subsequently altered the records, crossing out Schicklgruber and replacing it with a new spelling. Hitler. The question that haunted investigators for the next 140 years remained: who was the biological father? Was it the drifter Johann Georg? Was it Johann Nepomuk, the man who actually provided for him and went to such extreme lengths to rewrite his identity? Or was there a third player in this shadow play? Following the war, a chilling theory emerged from Hans Frank, Hitler's personal lawyer who wrote his memoirs while facing the gallows at Nuremberg. Frank claimed that in 1930, Hitler had tasked him with a secret investigation into his ancestry. Frank alleged he uncovered evidence that Maria Schicklgruber had been a domestic servant for a Jewish family named Frankenberger in Graz, and that their 19-year-old son had fathered the child. According to this account, the Frankenbergers even paid child support for years. For decades, this Jewish grandfather theory was largely dismissed by the academic elite. Their skepticism was anchored to a 1957 claim by historian Nikolaus von Preradovic, who asserted that not a single Jewish person lived in Graz prior to 1856. If no Jews were present when Alois was conceived in 1836, the Frankenberger story was impossible. Preradovic doubled down on this in 1967 and again in 1989. Despite no independent researcher ever verifying his data, the assertion became an immovable fact in historical circles, a fossilized piece of consensus that few dared to chip away at. The mystery stayed dormant, with most scholars settling on one of the Hitler brothers as the father. Hitler himself stayed silent on his roots, though he once flew into a violent rage and ordered the removal of a commemorative plaque in Spittel that mentioned his youth. He seemed desperate to bury the past, but science was about to dig it up. In 2010, the first genetic cracks appeared. Belgian journalist Jean-Paul Mulders and historian Mark Vermeer tracked down 39 of Hitler's living paternal relatives, from Europe to a great-nephew in New York. They took saliva samples to map the Y chromosome. The genetic signature passed virtually unchanged from father to son. The findings were a bombshell. The dominant lineage was haplogroup E1b1b. a marker exceptionally rare in Western Europe, appearing in only 9% of German and Austrian men. However, it is a staple in North Africa among Berber populations and is found in roughly 20% of Ashkenazi Jewish men. The media erupted. Was the architect of the Holocaust actually descended from the very people he sought to wipe out? But as is often the case with DNA, the truth was far more nuanced than a front-page splash. Experts like Professor Michael Hammer quickly pointed out a major caveat. 80% of German men with the E1b1b marker have no Jewish heritage at all. This lineage dates back tens of thousands of years to East Africa and moved across the globe through ancient migrations. Having this marker doesn't prove you are Jewish or Berber. It simply means your ancestors were part of a deep human gene pool that shifted millennia ago. Geneticist Razib Khan noted that even within Europe, most carriers are not Ashkenazi. Furthermore, the 2010 study had a glaring flaw. It didn't test Hitler himself. It relied on the assumption that the paternal line had remained unbroken for generations. If even one illegitimate birth had occurred in the family tree, the entire conclusion was worthless. By 2019, critics even attacked the study's collection methods, leaving the world with a provocative signal but no definitive proof. To get a real answer, the world needed Hitler's own biological code, a feat that seemed impossible for 80 years. In 2009, archaeologist Nick Bellantoni gained access to the Russian state archives in Moscow, which held two grim relics from the Berlin bunker. A skull fragment with a bullet hole and blood-soaked fabric from the sofa where Hitler died. Bellantoni was granted just 1 hour with the items. He took samples, noting immediately that the skull looked off. When his team analyzed the DNA, the result was stunning. The skull belonged to a woman under the age of 40, not a 56-year-old man. The skull was a hoax, but the bloodstains on the sofa were real, and they were about to be placed in the hands of the woman who found Richard III, Turi King. Starting in 2021, King and her team spent 4 years painstakingly sequencing the DNA from that bunker fabric. They compared it to a verified male relative, and the Y chromosome markers were a perfect match. For the first time, we had two certainties. The blood was definitely Hitler's, and his paternal line was exactly what the official records claimed. If he had a Jewish grandfather or any outsider father, the Y chromosome would have been a mismatch. The Frankenberger myth was finally dead. However, the DNA held a different, more personal secret. King's team discovered a specific deletion in the P2 gene, a mutation linked to Kalman syndrome, a rare condition that prevents the onset of normal puberty. This genetic glitch leads to low testosterone and, in some cases, underdeveloped sexual organs or a micropenis. It suddenly provided a biological context for a 1923 medical report that noted Hitler suffered from an undescended testicle. Historian Alex Kay remarked that this finding finally explained Hitler's lifelong social dysfunction, his visible awkwardness around women, and his total lack of intimate relationships. He lived a life of political obsession that left no room for a private world, only marrying Eva Braun 24 hours before their double suicide. They left no heirs. But as the researchers dug deeper into his polygenic risk scores, comparing his markers to a massive Danish database, the findings moved from the physical to the psychological, and that's where the controversy turned ugly. Professor Dita de Montes found that Hitler's genetic scores for schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and autism were in the top 1% of the population. She was careful to state that these are not diagnoses but statistical probabilities. Yet when the 2025 documentary Hitler's DNA Blueprint of a Dictator aired, the backlash was immediate. Scientists like Adam Rutherford slammed the program as a deluge of misinformation. Critics argued that being in a high-risk percentile doesn't mean a person actually has the condition. More importantly, bioarchaeologists questioned if DNA really added anything to our understanding of a man already so heavily documented. There was also a deep ethical concern. By linking conditions like autism to a monster, the film risked stigmatizing millions of innocent people. The most biting irony, as noted by The Guardian, was that by suggesting genes made Hitler who he was, the filmmakers were leaning into the very biological determinism Hitler himself championed. Dr. King admitted the tension, noting that while the study was headed for a major journal, the production company rushed it to TV before peer review, casting a shadow of doubt over the science. Yet beneath the media circus, a profound truth remains. The man who demanded purity from a continent was, by his own biological standards, defective. Not because of a secret Jewish ancestor or a North African past, but because his own body failed his own ideology. Under the very eugenics laws he signed, his genetic profile would have marked him for the gas chambers. Today, the blood-stained fabric remains a silent witness, and the research still waits for final academic validation. The skull in Moscow remains a mystery, belonging to a woman whose name we will never know. And in the dusty records of rural Austria, the true identity of the man who fathered Alois Schicklgruber is still a ghost. If this genetic journey proves anything, it's that the obsession with blood purity was a lie from the start. But was it a lie Hitler believed, or was it a shield he built because he lived in fear of what his own veins truly contained? If you're ready to see how DNA is rewriting everything we thought we knew about history, subscribe now. The next mystery is even more unbelievable.